Yeah, so this is our fifth reoccurring TELx Council meeting. These reoccurring meetings provide several critical functions to our governance. They provide transparency to our community. They create structure for our forum. They provide authors the ability to present their proposals to the council and community, which allows the council and community to review, debate, refine these proposals so that we can get to a place where we have consensus and mutual understanding. They provide a medium for regular TELx ecosystem updates. They ensure consistent communication between council members and the community, and allow the community to directly engage in Q&A with us, the council members. So the TELx Council is a local governance organization with the authority over and duties towards TELx operational rules, systems, health, and social well-being. Again, the overview for us is really to accept, develop, and vote on TELx IPs, to change or introduce new elements to TELx, or to alter any harvesting rules, and we're responsible for generally representing the interests of and informing our constituency in matters pertaining to everything TELx. So in terms of duties, the TELx Council is required to, 1, plan, finance, and coordinate implementation of improvements to the TELx ecosystem. 2, regulate the flow of TEL issuance throughout TELx to be harvested by liquidity miners. 3, introduces, alters, and enforces TELx operational rules, including harvesting, information and communication, maintenance and construction. 4, informs miners of the activities and outcomes related to TELx and results from any snapshot votes. And these snapshot votes are a requirement for all council members. And in order for a proposal to move forward, there needs to be a 5 out of 6 majority vote, with all 6 members voting within a 5-day period from when the proposal is posted to Snapshot. So with that being said, we can jump into kind of a recap of the last meeting, which I know we kind of reviewed Ty's single asset provision. We went through the TELx data and analytics framework from myself, and then got into Tim's review of some additional pools, which we found out and got some more clarity just in terms of issuance and what levels we have in terms of budget for TEL issuance and allocation. So I don't know, I can open up the floor basically to anybody that wants to chime in. If not, maybe Ty, I know me and you had some meetings with some of the town members recently. If you want, we can update, the rest of the community on how that meeting went and kind of where we are with our proposals before we talk to the new one that Mike wanted to propose with this new pool on base. So I'll open up the floor to anybody else that wants to chime in, or Ty, I can just pass it to you to give us an update on the latest with your proposal.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Just to close off that first point, we also talked about Balancer version 3, equity pool provision, and Axler integration last time. That was the 5 kind of points that I had made from the last discussion, and there was no questions from the community. So we've got a small audience today, so maybe we'll get a couple of questions at the end as well. So yeah, but carrying on then from what Andrew said about the meeting with the it was Leo, Marcus and Grant we met with, and we both discussed our proposals. Just quickly, because I know we've got a lot to cover this morning, there is not an issue, but this is really, our proposals are the first proposals that require major funding to develop as part of the proposal. And the general process is we're working through it as we do it, because we're the first to actually undergo this. So really we're trying to define a process, and the process is hinging around estimating the cost of what we're going to do, what we're trying to develop. And there was some discussion on how that process works, and it's still in discussion. Grant's, I think, going to be talking to Parker we raised some questions and these need to be resolved. So as far as my proposal goes, it was generally considered to be more complex than Andrew's to implement. And so rather than trying to progress two equally at the same time, I'm taking a step back. I'm working in the background with Leo so that the specification a little bit better, and Leo's going to put together a technical specification on what's required. So I'm working with Leo on that. So in terms of progressing my proposal to any level of snapshot vote, I need to include a good estimate of the costs. So that's where we're at with that one, with my proposal. So I'm more or less taking the second cab off the rank on that one, working in the background and giving Andrew the capacity to put his forward first. So unless there's any questions, I'll hand back to Andrew on that one.
Yeah, no questions for me. I'll give a second to see if anybody else has any questions on the council, and then we can move forward with the updates on mine as well. All right,
Okay,
sounds good. I think we've talked about yours enough, Ty, and I think we've all maybe had either individual calls or calls like this together, or chats back and forth. Provide our opinions on everything. So I think we're all in alignment now. And to your point, it's just the understanding of the development work and estimating kind of what those costs are going to look like, so that we can manage our budget accordingly throughout the rest of the year. So. Okay, so that's good. So update on mine. Essentially, what we tried to do is break it into a couple of different, more manageable parts. So within the entire proposal for mine, it was kind of, putting all of these kind of different parts together. So the goal is really just to break them into 2 or 3 different parts. The first being, developing kind of that framework on Dune Analytics, building those dashboards, and, understanding what metrics we want to follow. So I did post a revised version of that to the forum. So I did see a couple comments. I know, Dave, you're in here. I know you posted a comment in there, so thanks for that as well. Always appreciate the feedback and support. So then the second part, once we kind of get that Dune Analytic framework and dashboard kind of up and running, then the next part will be to connect it to the TELx website. And then probably the third, whether or not we can do, parts 2 and 3 in conjunction with each other. I'm not sure, but part 3 will be more just about, the design and UX UI implications of it, getting it connected to TELx and how we display it, manipulate it, and whatnot, and give a little bit more flexibility to those users who are interested in the ecosystem to look at different analytical trends and whatnot, depending on their biases and preferences on where they want to invest their money. So really for me, the overarching project is still there. It's just we're kind of break it up into smaller parts, just because it's a little bit more manageable to look at it from a budgetary perspective. And if we get to a point where the budget is tight, we could always push other aspects of that proposal out into future years where the budgets get replenished and whatnot. So I'll open it up if anybody has kind of any questions, comments, remarks on that. If not, then we'll give the floor to Mike to go through his proposal and kind of take it from there.
Yeah, just would like to say that I like your proposition very, very much. It's very clear. And I wondered if it was possible to add an impermanent loss tracker to the analytics. I believe it's a good metrics to have to decide whether you want to jump in or not.
Yeah, I thought about that too, because I did use ChatGPT just to kind of look at what the top metrics were. And again, I'm very open to what metrics we track. I didn't put impermanent loss in there, I think, just because I want to understand, like, how can we track that? I don't know if I could wrap my brain around how we can track impermanent loss, because impermanent loss really is an implication of when you join a pool and what the asset prices are at the start of that, right? So I just don't know how we track that and how difficult that will be to measure. But if there's a way that we can do it, I'm totally for it. I think that is a good metric to track and follow, and give people a real indication of what is essentially the major risk when involving or getting involved in liquidity provision. It's just how do we properly track that and display that in a manner that is accurate.
Yeah, I track my impermanent loss with an Excel spreadsheet, and the only way I've managed to come up with tracking it is for every provision and withdrawal, you've got to calculate the price at the time of the transaction. So if you make a deposit into your liquidity pool, then you have to base the IL on the price at that point. If you make a second deposit, you have to then recalculate IL based on the price at that point as well. It gets quite complicated, and I'm not even sure I'm doing it correctly, but at least I'm getting a flavour of what my IL is. So in order to do that for everybody in every pool, it's you're dealing at a real minute level of tracking the data, and I'm not sure the data warehouses can track the price at every transaction point. That's a huge overhead for tracking IL on a big scale. So yeah, I think the problem's on presenting, because IL is different for everybody, as Andrew said, depending on when you invest, but also when you withdraw, it changes. When you invest again, it changes. So if somebody's jumping in and out of a pool, their IL is changing all the time. So
Yeah, and there's a difference between unrealized and realized impermanent loss as well from that perspective too. But I think what Will is trying to get at is like a generic kind of impermanent loss factor when looking at it. Again, well, I'm not saying I'm not opposed to it. It's just I think we need to wrap our heads around how we can do that, because I don't want to look at it on an individual basis, because to your point, Ty, that's going to be way too time consuming. If we can find a way to track it, represent it in a way where it's showcasing, the pool as a whole, then I'm all for it. It's just I can't wrap my head around how we do that yet. But I'm definitely open to that if we want to do that. But like I said too, with any other metrics, I'm totally open. If whatever stuff we want to track, again, I'm open. Whatever I put in the updated proposal was just kind of like the higher level stuff that I wanted to make sure that we were tracking. But if there is other metrics that we want to follow, whether it's from the council or the community, I'm on board to track as much data as possible, because then we can use that later on to broadcast that data in a positive light to a broader community, to obviously increase the level of liquidity provision within the entire ecosystem.
I think I can come up with something to calculate the impairment loss. So I'll try to draft something and submit it to you via Discord or something. And what I'm thinking is that when you get into a pool, in a 80-20 pool, you put that much TEL and that much of the other assets, and then that's equivalent to a total number of TEL. Let's say you put 1 million TEL. So okay, you sell 200,000 to make the pair. And so now you have 800,000 TEL and 20% of the other assets. But that's equivalent to 1 million TEL, right? So what we can say is that in the future, just track what the equivalent amount of TEL you would have and divide it by what it was 7 days, 30 days, or 90 days ago, whatever. And then you can get how many TEL you lost. And that would be a good start, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good start. Will, if the one thing I'm thinking of that might be a challenge there is you've got to define a starting point and ending point kind of thing, right? I think the way that we would like to try to track impermanent loss is kind of more of understanding, okay, over the last 7 days, over the last 30 days, or whatever it is. It's just finding those metrics and way we can do it. But let's continue to have the discussion. We could take it to DMs on how we want to try to do it, and maybe it's almost like a separate calculation every time. I don't know if that can be built into Dune or not, but that could be something that we discuss with the TAL once we have a better understanding of what kind of the budget and funding is needed, and maybe kind of get an understanding of like, okay, if we want to add another metric, what is the cost per metric that we want to add. I would assume that some of them are more difficult to put up than others, but maybe we can find a general rough idea that it's going to budgetary wise it's going to cost $100 in developmental work to put a new metric together or something like that. I don't know, but
Yeah, okay. I'll try to send you something, let's say this week or next week. Let's see what I can see. We can come up with.
Yeah, no, sounds like a plan.
If you're going to do that, it has to be reflective of what impermanent loss is. And impermanent loss is how the pool performs in relation to the two assets. So you can't just use TEL as a base. It has to be how the two assets are performing over the period, because it's all about the divergence and convergence of the asset values over time. It's not how TEL performs. So
for sure,
if you're going to do analytics, it's got to be a real measure of IL.
Yeah, and in Will's example too, it's not to say that some people won't take $1 million TEL and sell 200 for the other asset, or maybe they already have $1 million TEL and are providing the other asset because they already have it, right? So it's just those two different metrics too that we gotta kind of have to follow. But again, let's take it to DMs and see what we can do to make that happen. But that's absolutely something I would love to display. It's again still wrapping my head around how we do it.
Cool.
Okay, any other comments on that one? If not, Mike, then we'll give you the floor to pitch the proposal for a new pool on base.
Okay, thanks, guys. I wrote this proposal yesterday, and then just kind of ran it by our good friend Parker, and he sort of, obviously he put his. You can probably see the difference in the drafts from mine to his, and recognize the language, which I think is awesome. I think it's great that he's willing to step in and just sort of polish things. But so my proposal, like we discussed in recent meetings, is to maximize, mostly as a TELx Council member, I feel like it's imperative that we maximize our surface area, our liquidity options, our the ability for users on other platforms to get access to the TEL token, to interact with it, to swap it, to provide liquidity in it. And trying to find the most meaningful ways to do that with the resources that we have. And so this one is just obviously to expand. The first pool would be to deprecate an underperforming pool in our current TELx incentive structure, which is the DFX pool, and use those rewards to incentivize a pool on a growing and burgeoning network like Base with two high liquid assets like TEL and Ethereum, which will provide, and I think will provide a lot of volume to the token on that network. But in order to get to that point where we have tradable liquidity, then I would propose that we bootstrap that liquidity by offering incentives out the gate. And that may not take very long to, basically relinquish those incentives. If the base pool were to perform something like the TEL Ethereum V3 pool on Uniswap, then at that point we would withdraw incentives and incentivize another pool structure. But sort of the whole key behind having this issuance is to promote more liquidity across multiple platforms. And once those pools become liquid enough, then we can choose to no longer incentivize them because they kind of stand on their own 2 feet, if you will. There are several pools that do that in high volume environments, and as we enter into more and more volume over the coming year, some of the current pools that we have now may become, it may fall into that category where we no longer need incentives, and we can use our creativity to try to expand the network and the effect of liquidity across multiple chains and multiple dexes, et cetera. So this pool, that's sort of like the long version of the summary, but the proposal is fairly simple. That is to deprecate the TELx USDC pool on Balancer, and to then replace it, to use those incentives to bootstrap liquidity on Base and the Ethereum pool on Uniswap version 3. That pool has been selected, in my opinion, as we discussed in permanent loss and the risks associated with that. Uniswap V3 pools are great, in my opinion, because you can still provide 50-50 full range liquidity, but you can also then cater your liquidity decisions based upon your investment profile and the type of investment returns that you want to get. So you can provide a concentrated liquidity position and which offers our traders the more liquidity around a certain price point for at the expenditure of less total liquidity provided. So that's the reason I selected Uniswap. I feel like it's an innovative system that allows our users to provide more liquidity around the price of the token. The functional specifications of this would include mapping the token to Base, which is underway. I've been working with Amir on that. We did a pull request last week with Base. That request has been opened, but no questions have come back yet, but it has not been completed. I hope to hear more on that from Amir by the end of this week. And then we would have to then put some liquidity into, move some TEL over to the Base network, which I will do, and maybe other council members would be willing to do as well. And we would then create a pool on Base on Uniswap for Ethereum with some small amount of liquidity to get the pool up and running, but to make it easy for our future liquidity providers to find and to see the trade volume that's going through that pool. We then have to sort of figure out how to reward it, and we do that by switching over the smart contract, creating one on Base that allows for those incentives to be distributed just as they are through Balancer and through TELx via Balancer, whereas you can claim rewards for your total amount of liquidity provided. There is some math that has to go on there because if you provide $1,000 worth of liquidity full range, and I provide $1,000 worth of liquidity, and with a plus or minus 20%, I think that the incentives will be based upon total amount of liquidity provided as a calculation, not based upon the concentration of that liquidity. But I'm open to listen to counterpoints on that if anyone has any. But that's the way I view it. And then so the TELDFX pool would be deprecated. That issuance would go to this new pool, and then we have to sort of figure out how to then add that pool onto TELx. So we'll talk to the web developers so we can make it look pretty. There's a click to claim feature for your issuance on TELx, which you would connect to your MetaMask wallet or your hardware wallet or your MetaMask wallet or your Wallet Connect through the TELx platform and be able to see and claim your rewards, which does require some web development and requires us to be able to connect the Base network to the TELx website. So if this initial council meeting approves the proposal, we'll go and seek that information from the TAO and discover how much work is involved with that, the costs associated with it. I expect it would be fairly minimal, but there will be some. And so figuring out if we can, how to best do that. That's about all I got on that. I think they've kind of covered it, probably over covered it. It's a pretty simple proposal, but just want to make sure everybody understands what I'm coming from in this proposal. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, no, really well done, Mike. I think it's pretty straightforward, pretty, simple to understand. The question I was just going to ask, you mentioned like the mapping. Is that a one-time thing? So if we decide in the future to incentivize another pool on base, like is that mapping going to need to be done for each individual pool, or is that just like a one-time thing for each chain that we kind of look at?
That's a one-time thing for each chain. So if we want to add additional TEL token pools, that's no problem.
Okay, so
you just have to have it so that it is for the right.
Yeah, okay,
there'll be a contract. There'll be a base contract address, like there is on Polygon, which is different than the one on Ethereum, which is different than the one on Telcoin Network, and then it has to have the logo, the TEL logo, so it doesn't look like a scary question mark when people are like, what is this? Is this? What am I buying here? You want, you have to like, and so those are the things you could do. Like we could map over. You can just bridge the TEL token. Apparently, if you just bridge it to Arbitrum, it'll map itself, but it won't feature the TEL logo and things like that. So there's extra work involved with that. So when Amir did it, he uploaded the logo to the pull request. So it should, say this is the official token of TEL, and then have a nice, pretty TELcoin logo, so that people will feel confident in their exchange of that, and not just feeling nervous. I think that's sort of the biggest thing of moving to a new network is making sure that our users are interacting with the TEL token and not some misrepresentation of it by some scammer. So that's always the rub.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. Okay, no, that makes sense. Okay, I like the idea too of the different liquidity provisions depending on, I guess, the liquidity miners' expertise in the area. I know for some of us, V3 and concentrated liquidity is kind of a little bit newer because we're used to, providing to, the balancer pools, which is, basically just a full range, 80-20. So with that being said, I know you touched on it a little bit with like the incentives, but how, like if you provide to the concentrated liquidity, I provide to the more balanced approach, full spectrum. How are those incentives going to be different? Like, is it still just based off the liquidity pool tokens in general?
Yeah, I think it should be based off of the liquidity pool token. Like with V3, you get when you provide liquidity to a V3 pool, you get an NFT issued to you as a token. The thing I don't fully understand, and I think is worth consideration, is what the value of your liquidity is. Like I said before, if you're providing $1,000 worth of liquidity and it's a 50-50 pool and it's full range, and I provide $1,000 worth of liquidity and it's 5% plus or minus on the price of TEL versus Ethereum, I'm going to go out of range much quicker. But should it be based upon your time in range? Should it be based upon if you're out of range? Do you still, it can get somewhat complicated to provide incentives. So
yeah,
I don't. Those are sort of the points of clarity that we need to discuss. If I'm out of range and I don't do anything about it, and I'm out of range for a month and a half, I'm just hoping it comes back in range. Do I still get the TEL issuance?
Well, that's kind of what I was. Yeah, that's what I was going to say, and what I was thinking too is just to try to keep the incentives under the keep it simple, stupid model, where it's straightforward for everybody. And if it's like if you provide $1,000 and I provide $1,000 at the same time, yet mine is full scope, whereas yours is concentrated. The benefit that you have is really on when the volume or the swaps and the asset prices are within your range, because you're going to have a higher fee percentage, from what I understand of V3.
That's correct.
So
yeah,
incentive structure coming from us, like that incentive is going to be the same, but the benefit to providing on a V3 concentrated liquidity is that your swap fees generated from the pool when you're within range is going to be at a higher rate, thus the incentive to provide concentrated liquidity. I personally don't think we want to complicate it too much to factor those two things in when we're talking about incentives, just because the upside is going to be on the fee side of things. So let's not, again, just my opinion, let's try not to complicate the incentives, where the added benefit of providing concentrated liquidity is going to come from the increased generation of swap fees when it's in that range that you're in.
Right. Yeah, I don't agree with that. I'm sorry. But, if you allocate incentives to everyone just based on how much liquidity you provide, let's just say I choose a range that is like 2 years away from being met, then I can earn incentives with basically zero risk and contributing zero liquidity to the system. So that can't be it. I mean, I already think of many ways to, just rob the incentives without providing liquidity properly. So I guess it has to be related to the concentration of your liquidity. If not, people are just going to rob TEL from the system.
Okay,
that's a good point. I will. Yeah,
I know I will.
Yeah, I know. That is a great point. I think that is sort of the key, is trying to figure out, and I think this could all be done. The incentives could be tied to fees, like as far as like the weight. So if I'm providing a narrower band of liquidity and I'm receiving, if Will, if you provide $1,000 and I provide $1,000, but I'm in a 10% band and I'm getting 100% APY, and you're getting 10% APY because you've chosen a more conservative approach. But you do have a good point. Like, there is that person should get incentivized based upon the fee volume that they provide, or the fees that they accrue, because you've chosen to take that risk. And if you go out of range, then also you shouldn't be incentivized, because you're no longer providing liquidity.
Yeah, exactly.
Much as you do in the current pools, if you withdraw your liquidity and you just put it back in, you don't get incentivized for that period of time where it's withdrawn. And so if you're out of range, that would incentivize people to continue to keep their liquidity in range. Otherwise, they don't get the issuance. So I think that's a great point.
So then how would we factor in, for people that want to go with a balanced approach? Do we split the incentives, so to speak, where, a percentage of it doesn't need to be 50-50? We can discuss that. But there's a percentage for, the balanced approach, from 0 to infinity, like the balancer pools are now, and then have like a specific incentive pool to pull from for concentrated liquidity. Because, Will, it's a good point. I can put my range wherever and just, siphon incentives in V3. But then at that point too, like, you're not getting any fees either. But I'm just trying to think, like, how do we kind of balance that approach? Because it sounds like, I don't know if we can do one or the other, but maybe there's a balance that we can strike here.
I think that the incentives should go to the concentrated liquidity. And as Mike said, you just have to tie it to the fees you earn. So the more you earn fees, the more you get incentives. And that is that simple, I think.
So then how would we track that? That would have to be a manual thing, or can we develop something to track and monitor that on a ongoing basis? Because I think some of the challenges before, where we were doing airdrops, is in tax implications. if we do a weekly poll to see who gets what, then, we're airdropping. And if somebody doesn't necessarily want to claim on a week-to-week basis due to tax purposes, then what?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. There is ways to do this. Because I did a pool like this not too long ago on Arbitrum. It was a concentrated liquidity pool, but you got they were giving they were incentivizing these pools. Gosh, what was the name of the freaking pool? It's a picture of the old guy. But yes, but if you were out of range, then you stopped getting the incentives. And so there's a way to do it. It's all trackable, but it does add complexity. I'll talk to Parker and Amir about that and see what their thoughts are on that. I mean, I know it can be done as it has been done across the ecosystem, but discovering how to do it and implementing it does add a layer of complexity to the proposal. So,
can I ask a couple of questions? When you supply your liquidity, if you're supplying full range, your liquidity, do you get LPT tokens as well as your NFT, Mike, or is it just all an NFT?
I don't remember.
Okay.
I don't remember. Yeah.
The point I'm going to make is that if you supply liquidity and it's a full range, then your liquidity is still tied up. It might not be earning fees, and it might not be participating in swaps because it's full. Well, if it's full range, it will. You'll just get a reduction in fees. But from the user's point of view, he's still tied up his liquidity. So therefore, he still should receive rewards. I think.
Of course. Yeah.
So I don't agree with Will in terms of the robbing TELx. I think from a user's point of view, if he puts liquidity into a base, then he should still get a share of the rewards in TELx.
Sure. I think there's a little bit of confusion. I think what Will is saying is, like, for those, if you're providing full range, you're always going to be getting incentives and you're always going to be getting fees. But he's talking about if you decide to provide a concentrated liquidity position that's 100% away from the current strike price of TEL versus ETH. So let's say today it's at like 0.00002 something or whatever it is, and you provide your liquidity at something that's like 0.007. But you're because like I'm providing this concentrated liquidity band. I'm just doing this because there's no risk to me. My pool is out of range. I can provide 100% TEL, or I can provide 100% ETH, and I can just stay out of range, but I can claim rewards. So that's what we want to. That's the sort of situation that we want to prevent, is those who are providing a concentrated liquidity position that is not in the tradable range.
But then he wouldn't get so the downside to the user in that case would be that he'd get reduced fees. Sure. He's still tying up his liquidity. It's still in base. It's just not being used. So therefore, he should still get the same. Otherwise, you're adding a huge complexity to the way TELx operates, I think.
Well, I think in Mike's example, Ty, like if somebody's at the high end of the band, they're not going to get fees because it's not swapping within that range. And to Will's point, they shouldn't get incentives. I think where I got a little stuck up with Will's comments too was just understanding how do we distribute those incentives. If it's going to be, 2.78 million per 30 days, how do we distribute those incentives between those who want to provide concentrated liquidity and those who want to provide full range liquidity, right? Because then we have to take that amount and divvy it up somehow. And is it 50-50? Is it 75-25? Is it 80-20? I don't know. But at that point, then we need to provide a certain amount of incentives for those who want to do, 0 to infinity price, and then a more concentrated incentives for those that are going to be within those bands, which again, we could always tie to the fees because that's, a good metric to track.
Ultimately, I think it needs to be, when I think this through, I think it needs to be the amount of liquidity times the time and range. If you're a full range, you're always in range. And if you've provided an X amount of liquidity. If you're concentrated and you go in and out of range and you're only in range for half the month, then you should only receive half of the incentives that you would have if you were in range for the whole month. That's the way I think is the most fair distribution model. The amount of liquidity times the time and range. How to stream that to a user so that it's claimable.
But Mike, if you're outside the time and range, like I just don't know where time comes into it. If you're outside the range, then you're not generating any fees. And you would take your fees for whatever time period, divide that by the total amount of fees to get a percentage of what your allocation is.
I don't think we should spend time trying to design the system here, to be honest.
That's true.
I think
let me work this out. This is something that I for some reason didn't think of in this proposal.
No. I think it's a good conversation to have, so that we have a better understanding of it too. Like this is a good forum for it.
Can I ask you a quick question? Can I ask you a quick question? Not to beat this dead horse, but I've just kind of been sitting here listening. But is there the flexibility to maybe increase the swap fees, but then lower the incentives? And so you wouldn't get those incentive robber barons, so to speak, right? In the sense that you would push people to keep it within a normalized range in order to collect more of those fees. And you wouldn't have that. Maybe you would disincentivize the scenario that we're kind of talking about here.
I think we're in danger of creating another kind of scenario where we had the generic pools where the formula for calculating rewards was so complicated it actually put people off providing liquidity because they had no idea how the bloody thing worked. And so I think we've got to be careful about creating something that's actually a disincentive to people providing liquidity because it's difficult to understand to the normal Joe.
Yeah, for sure. V3 is not for the normal Joe. It's for advanced liquidity providers that know what they are doing, that know what range they choose, and it's I find the concept interesting, but it's really difficult to comprehend, and it's really definitely not for the masses.
No, it requires a lot of attention. If you've ever done it, it requires a lot of attention daily. I mean, because asset prices move pretty wildly in this space. So and maybe as a result of this, we discover that adding that layer of complexity by doing a concentrated liquidity pool isn't the best route forward to increase our exposure to base, but to do a more conventional, full range model. Before we jump ship on the concentrated liquidity thing, though, I want to figure out if there is a relatively low lift scenario that we can accomplish where we can track amount of liquidity times time and range times time of providing it, regardless whether it's concentrated or not. That is easily represented, and it may have to be an airdrop. We don't want to really get back into that. We want to get back into claim. We want to keep it on a claim thing, I think. So let me look at that. Let me look into that before but at the end of the day, we might end up just switching to a different concept altogether. The concept in general is just to try to increase our liquidity across multiple chains, and maybe we have to take the simple approach at first. And then people can then go and create their own concentrated liquidity pools on base if they want to try to maximize those benefits.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to the V3 and concentrated liquidity. To Will's point, like it's going to be a more advanced liquidity provider, and in order for us to help push that too, we would just need to provide some educational content to get people across that bridge to help them with that. But yeah, I'm all for this. It's just, to your point, maybe we walk before we run, so to speak.
Right.
But I think the conversations that we've had so far have been great, and just further understanding of it in general. So,
yeah.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Nope. Okay.
Real quickly, Mike, maybe you can opine on this, but what is the current relationship then with TEL as it pertains to DFX? I mean, I know it's still on the TELx website. It's powered by ETH, Polygon, Balancer, DFX. Like, I understand that's why we're deprecating this pool, but is that also taking away, a source of liquidity for anyone looking to purchase that token as well?
I don't know. I don't know that they're. I know we were sort of tightly associated. I don't know the answer to your question because I don't run in that. I don't really run in that circle. But I am under the impression that there was a relationship that was had some benefit. Years past. When we thought sort of and it's a very innovative model, the foreign exchange model, but there's no, DFX was always hampered by volume. And I think that there's that sort of model no longer is relevant to be, and so I don't know. To answer your question, I don't know what's going on with DFX, or I don't really follow it much, and I don't know if there is or a continuing relationship with anybody at Telcoin, but I don't have a relationship with anybody at DFX, so I couldn't really speak on it.
I think within the community with DFX, I still hold DFX, and I think within the community, they still have high hopes for the concept to take off once stable coins get more and more widely accepted potentially under Trump's crypto regime. But the facts of the matter are, I think the volume of liquidity supplied into the TELx DFX pool is low, and the transaction volume's low as well. So in my book, that would be one of the better pools to deprecate first. But
I mean, we would never go from where we are now and be like, let's pick what token do we want to incentivize liquidity in. Let's figure out, which token's trading $5,000 in volume a day. That's the one we want to target. Like, we would never, in our right minds, go forward and pick DFX as a incentive, as an incentivized pool, as a council. So there's no in that respect. There's no reason to keep it. If DFX does prove out their model and like stablecoins get traction and DFX becomes a multi-billion-dollar token one day, then of course we pivot. We just have to be fluid in our decision making, and we can always come back to that later. But now it's been underperforming for a very long time, and it's not worth the incentives for our liquidity to support a token that doesn't really trade any volume.
Okay, no, totally agree with all those. I just wanted to get your opinion on it because I don't disagree with any of the points you made. I wanted to just get clarity more for myself because in that same vein, I know DFX is also moving over to Base as well, and I don't know to what extent, but I know they're exploring that option as well. So we might see them on the other side, anyways. But
we'll get our token over there, and if they get their token over there, and it becomes a success, and they start seeing volumes and liquidities that support us considering them again for incentivization, then we can do that.
100%. Yeah, we can stand it up pretty easily.
Yeah, just to provide a little more context on that too, Matt. But I think there was probably some dependencies and partnerships in place before with those kind of other stable coins that are non-USD that were part of TELx before. And I think probably before, the digital bank thing was, thought of and, got a lot more legs compared to where it is now. They needed somebody to provide, those quote unquote digital cash currencies for different regions and different countries throughout the world. And DFX was kind of already doing that. So I think that's where the partnership started. And then Telcoin had a little bit of dependency on them to try to get into those markets. But obviously with the way things are going and, if they're going to be able to put forward their own, e-currencies, digital cash for these different countries, then the dependency becomes less and less on DFX and more so on Telcoin, which in the long run is probably better because then they have a little bit more control on kind of how things are moving forward. But just wanted to provide a little bit more context on that.
Oh, agreed. A conclusion I came to as well. I just thinking it through. But yeah, I agree with you. Thanks for that.
Yeah, no problem. Okay. Any other questions, comments, concerns? I keep having that other point on the agenda just to talk about incentive distribution down the road. I don't think we've only got 9 minutes left. We don't need to dive into it, but I'm just always kind of thinking, forward in the next, 6-12 months as we try to expand, the ecosystem, and we'll eventually get to a point where we're beyond, 6 pools and we can't just deprecate one in favor of another. So just trying to wrap my head around, how do we allocate resources and incentives without having to make, council decisions every time. So just trying to think, in the future of what those kind of metrics could be and what kind of, platform or mechanisms we can use. But maybe just we could take that back for now, and we could talk about it when we've got a little bit more free time, I would say, during our calls.
So the total amount of incentives for TELx is about 15 or above 15 million TEL each month. And so as the price increases, as we all hope it will, I guess it will be easy to just distribute less TEL in each pool and open new pools.
It's very possible, yeah. But at the end of the day, like, again, how do we determine that and all that kind of stuff? So we have, to your point, a set amount of, incentives, whether we think about it on a per month or a per year basis. It's just how do we allocate those in a, DAO centric kind of manner. And again, just the example that I have and that I'm familiar with is the VE model, voting escrow, similar to what Balancer and DFX have done within the last couple of years, where it's, basically a voting every 2 weeks or whatever time frame we want to establish. And that's, voted on potentially with LPTs. But then the challenge with that I'm already thinking of is we have to stake those LPTs into, the TELx contract in order to get those incentives, which at that point we don't have control over. So we wouldn't be able to vote with those either. But the idea is just to understand and get some perspectives on, when we get to a point where we've got more pools, how do we automate in a decentralized fashion the distribution of those incentives to however many pools we decide to go from.
Yeah, I mean, I think to measure a pool, I've been thinking about this as well, quite a lot, Andrew, and I think that to measure the effectiveness of a pool, you've really only got 2 parameters. You've got the total value locked and you've got the transactions going through the pool. And so therefore, to compare the effectiveness of pools, maybe the total rewards that we get every month should be divvied up to the pools based on that ratio somehow, and if a pool falls in the bottom 10% for 3 months in a row, then it becomes a candidate for deprecation in favour of another pool that might do better. And I think if you've got a fairly clear and simple mechanism in place that everybody can understand, then people know what they're getting into as well. And so I would move towards a simple set of rules that people can understand, and therefore there's clarity. If you make it too complicated, again, it gets confusing to the average Joe. So yeah, keep it simple, keep it well defined, and base it on total value locked and volume, and that's kind of applies to every pool and every chain, so it's a common denominator. Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, good ideas.
I'm all for it as well. There's a metrics that's called volatility, I guess, which is the volume divided by the total liquidity. And it just shows you how efficient and attractive a pool is for swaps. And so I guess we can use it to determine if we want to switch incentives or whatever.
Yeah, no, again, great ideas. Again, it's more food for thought as we kind of, think a little bit further out in terms of what optionality we'll have for that. I think for me, my perspective would be to try to have, the people that are involved, making the decision, which is a little bit more decentralized in that sense, I guess. But I guess that has its own challenges, is if you have a whale come in and provide to a pool or whatever, and obviously they hold a lot of the weight in terms of where those distribution of incentives go. But yeah, again, it's just more food for thought.
That was a problem in DFX, wasn't it? You had these VE boosts going to the whales that had the most locked up. So yeah.
Yeah, well, then they had even the incentives to try to push people towards different voting with the hidden hand stuff too. So again, that provides incentives for other people to try to push and sway people to move their liquidity. But like I said, we're getting close to the hour mark. I don't want to dive too much into this. I just kind of wanted to have some food for thought, and we can talk about it, I guess, a little bit more as it becomes a little bit more prevalent in the decisions that we have to make as council members going forward.
Yeah,
okay. Any questions, comments from the community? We'll give everybody an opportunity to jump up before we just conclude here and just confirm that everybody's still good for the next council call on February 5th. Anybody have any issues with that date while we wait to see if anybody has any questions from the community?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I'm good too.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Okay. So 2 p.m. Wednesday still seem to be okay. I know Tim had some concerns with that being in the UK. But you know what? If it continues to be a problem for him, we can discuss in Discord and go from there. So, okay. Doesn't look like we have any question from the community. So with that being said, I guess we can jump off. So thanks everybody for jumping on again. This was the 5th reoccurring TELx Council meeting. We'll get the recording posted to the TELcoin YouTube page as soon as possible. I guess we'll touch base with Leo on that and then take it from there. So we'll talk to you guys in a couple of weeks.
If not before, on DMs.
For sure, at least live and in person on the phone kind of thing in 2 weeks. But yeah, I'm sure we'll be in touch.
One quick final note. I just was texting with Parker about the incentivization thing of the V3 pools. He says that's been figured out, no doubt. Configure whatever pool you want. There's a contract for it. So it sounds like we can figure this out. But I'll dig into it more, and then we'll get back next meeting.
Okay. Mike,
thanks, guys.
maybe ask if for the next meeting if Parker can join and he can provide some context on his thoughts too, kind of around where things are. Be good to have insight as well.
Yep, we'll do. All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Perfect. All right. Thanks, gentlemen.
Okay. Has somebody got their hand up? No. Okay. All right.
Go ahead,
Bye,
Jack. Did you have something you wanted to say, Ty?
No, I just saw a hand coming up, and I wondered if